one of the new policy reform ideas in education is use of DBT, direct benefit transfers. Around the world, this is now an idea which has been researched, studied, and quite often also being implemented in some form or the other. In India also, the current government and many policymakers have been advocating the idea of direct benefit transfers and various ways of implementing DBT in the Indian education system. I think genesis of DBT, which also sometimes called as vouchers or scholarships or reimbursements of expenses incurred in the education system, right? So there are different terms which are being used to describe DBT or the different ways of implementing DBT. The genesis of DBT is largely around the question of accountability. So many researchers began to ask the question, who are the schools, the government schools, public schools, are accountable to? Right. And the answer, obviously, in practice, that they're accountable to the education department or to the government, not particularly to the parents. In many cases, the research also indicated quite clearly that parents were not even involved, not even encouraged to be involved or even visit many of the schools where the children actually studied. Right. So the issue of accountability drove some of the research and the thinking around how can we flip accountability from bureaucrats, Department of Education, to parents. Right. And there are many ideas that came on the table in terms of how we can achieve this goal of making schools accountable to parents. Right. One of the ideas is direct benefit transfers. So unlike in the school-centric funding of education model, right, where government gives money, grants to government schools, who then provide free education to whoever comes to those schools. Right. So money goes from government to the schools, and in a sense, schools then spend that money in providing free education to students. The accountability in this school-centered model is towards the government. The schools are accountable to the government and not to the students or to the parents. In the DBT model of funding, which can be described as student-centric model of funding, government gives an instrument like a voucher or cash transfer in the account of the parent or the student. Student that uses that money to pay the fees of the school, and the schools either directly the cash or if the voucher is given to the school, the schools will take the voucher and submit to the government, and the government will transfer money into the school's bank account. Right. So in the DBT, through a voucher system, the government giving a voucher to the parents or students who then use the voucher to take admission in the school and pay the voucher to the school in lieu of the fees. School then deposits voucher with the government, and government transfers the fund of equivalent amount to the bank account of the school. Right. That is the DBT style of funding model, right, where the student is at the center. Right. So in this case, as you can see, the accountability is not of the school, is not to the government, but to the students and the parents, because they are the ones who are paying either directly in the form of cash in some cases, or indirectly in the form of a voucher to the school. Right. So schools would now have to attract the students with a voucher in their hand or with a DBT. Right. And only depending on how many students they attract, they get the funding based on the number of students, and that decides the budget for the school. Right. So that's the different way of funding education. Right. In both cases, in the school-centric funding as well as in the student-centric funding model, the education is free for the students. They are not paying from their pocket. That cost is covered by public funds. Right. The difference only is in terms of who gets the fund and how it is being utilized within the system. In the student-centric funding model, the schools are directly accountable to the students. Right. They are paying to the schools either in cash or in kind through a voucher. Right. Schools can also be accountable to government. The government actually transfers funds to the school in exchange for a voucher. So government can also have some regulation over the schools in terms of those which are going to receive funds from the government. Right. So in this model, the primary accountability remains with the students and the secondary accountability with the government, right, which is quite different than in the school-centric funding model, where students or the parents have not really much role to play, and schools are not at all accountable to those who go to those schools. The DBT is generally given in one of the four forms. At least these are the four forms which are commonly used in India and around the world. Right? First, which is a cash transfer, cash being transferred into bank account of the beneficiary, which could be conditional, meaning conditional on condition of meeting certain requirements, or could be unconditional. Right. Second form is vouchers, which is like a coupon given to the beneficiary who can use the coupon to access the service, and the service provider then collects the coupon and then gets reimbursed by the state. Right. The third form, which has been one of the older forms of DBT, is a scholarship. Right. So students are being given scholarships either for various purposes, could be to cover overall cost of schooling or to cover school fees. In many cases now we give scholarships to even cover the tuition classes for the students. Right. And the third form, which is fourth form, which is largely used within the government for government employees, and that is reimbursement. For example, central government employees get reimbursement of the schooling expenses of their children up to a particular amount. Right. And that's the fourth way of implementing direct benefit transfer. Right. Those are four basic ways in which DBT can be implemented, and all the four are actually quite widely used across the world. Now, what are the benefits of DBT? Benefits of cash transfers, vouchers, or scholarships or reimbursements, any of the four forms of implementing DBT. Right. I think first and foremost, as I mentioned, is the accountability towards parents. Right? The service providers of education become accountable to the service receivers or consumers or clients. Right? So accountability changes from being to the government, to the customer, to the parents and the students. Right? That also, the reverse side of that coin is the choice available to the parents. So instead of parents having to go to a school which is a free school in the neighborhood, is really the only school and one school in the neighborhood, now they're able to go to any school in the neighborhood, which is public or private, right, with the cash transfer that they have received or through the voucher. Right. So parental choice becomes paramount in this DBT type of funding model. Right. And this actually is not just an issue of choice, but also issue of human right. The UN Declaration of Human Rights actually, of course, has three components for when it comes to education. And the first component is that it should be compulsory. Second component of the UN Declaration is that it should be free. And the third component, which quite often is overlooked and not mentioned, is the parents' right to choose the kind of education that will be given to their children. So parental choice is the third component in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Right? So it's not just issue of empowerment, which of course it is, it's also issue of a human right for the parents. So primary benefit of DBT is the parental accountability and parental choice. Along with that, there's equality of opportunity. All parents are treated equally in a sense. Those who are afford to pay from their own pocket versus those who have to rely on public funds. Right? Both of them have a choice within obviously the range of funding which is given through the public treasury. Right? They can choose the school they want to go to. Right? So in today's system, obviously those who have power to pay are able to choose a school, but those who are unable to pay have to go to government school. That's the only school which is available to them for free. Right? While the voucher or DBT makes it possible for them to access even the fee charging schools. With this opening of opportunity for parents to access private schools, you will see an increased competition in the system, right, between private schools and public schools, as well as, of course, among within private schools and public schools, right. And this competition generally usually has led to lowering of cost and improvement in the quality, right. And that you also would see in many cases where this has been applied in some parts of the world. All of this means the schools have to compete for all students, right. So not just the students who can pay or who cannot pay, right. So private schools compete only for those students who are able to pay, while the public schools compete for students who are not able to pay, right. So each one has a segregated market. What DBT does is to integrate the education market. Each school now has to compete for all students, those who are able to pay from their own pocket, as well as those who depend on public funds through DBT, right. And that brings equality on one hand. It also ensures that every school is now going to try to attract all students and try to retain them, right, to provide services of the quality that meets the expectations of students and parents, to retain those students in the school, right. So those are the, I think, key benefits of DBT. What are the counter arguments to DBT? How do we know DBT is working or not, right? There are a large number of DBT pilots and programs in education and outside education, and many of them, of course, have been researched in depth. So there's a lot of research evidence available on the various forms of DBT and their implementation. I would not be able to deal with all the counter arguments, but let me pick a few of them, which are probably more common in this area, particularly in relation to education DBT schemes, and then leave you to read further in terms of addressing the other counter arguments to DBT. I think first and foremost, what you hear the moment you mention giving cash transfer to the poor to access anything, including education, is that the poor will drink it away. The parents will drink away what you are giving them in the form of cash transfers. Right. And there's a very common understanding and argument that the poor need some guidance, some help to decide what's good for them. Right. Now, you can ask yourself, what is the evidence for this conclusion the poor would drink it away, right? Often there is hardly any research evidence of any sizable sample size that can give you this conclusion. Most of us rely on few people that we may know in our own life who are poor, and maybe one or two of them have behaved in this particular way, right? So the sample size that most people are relying on is one or two, on the basis of which they are willing to make a generalized conclusion that all poor would behave this way, right? In any other area, this would be quite laughable, but somehow when it comes to cash transfers and poor, it seems quite a reasonable argument. Now, there is one experiment that we did do in India in which we actually gave poor cash and told them what to do with it. And we didn't really monitor them, we didn't really force them to use it in that particular way. And we can ask what was the experience and the outcome of that experiment. This is the example I'm talking about, the Bihar bicycle scheme under the chief ministership of Nitish Kumar, right? In which government gave money to parents with girls who were passing out of class 8 and entering class 9, so that they can buy bicycle and hopefully be able to go to secondary school outside their own villages and towns. So we can ask what proportion of parents actually bought bicycle with the money that they were given by the government. Remember, here only thing government did is to make a request. We are giving you this money and please buy bicycle with it for your daughter. Research suggests more than 90% of the parents actually bought bicycle with that money. Let me repeat, more than 90% parents bought bicycle with that money. I don't know of any scheme of government of India or a state government that has a success rate even close to 90%. As you know, even the PDS and all the schemes that we have implemented and researched quite widely have a success rate of less than 50%, and quite often even 20, 30%. Right. So in one instance where we did trust the poor and gave them the money with a request to buy bicycle, 90% of them did buy the bicycle. Yes, there are 10% who did not. So question remains, do we judge and decide on public policy on the basis of what 10% would do, or on the basis of what 90% have done? A second common argument against DBT is that the parents or the poor generally lack the information and the ability to make a choice. Right? Either they don't have any information or any reliable information, or even if they do have the information, they don't have the capacity and ability to decide what's a good school for their child. Of course, one simple counter argument could be that we are in a democracy. The same parents, the same poor are making electoral choices, choosing our legislatures and chief ministers, members of parliament and the prime minister, right? And somehow that seems to work quite okay. Why wouldn't the same people be able to choose a school? That's an interesting question to ponder. There is one research study that does indirectly try to answer this question about the ability of poor to make a choice. Right. This is a study that was done in Pakistan by World Bank. What the researchers did is to pick a small town with about 20-25 schools in the town and ask the parents in the town to rank these 25 schools. Right. So which school is the best, rank number 1 to however down the list they want to go or able to go. Right. So now they collected the ranking by the parents in the town. Then they sent their experts, educationists, and told them that you design a formula or an algorithm and then assess the schools and rank those schools as per your parameters. So now there are two types of rankings. One ranking done by the parents and the other ranking of the same schools done by the experts. Right. The question the researchers asked was, what's the correlation, what's the similarity between these two types of rankings? Right. Are they similar to each other? How similar? Are they dissimilar? How dissimilar? Right. One way to decide this question of similarity is to look at the coefficient of correlation. Right. And it turns out that coefficient was more than 0.9. What that meant is the ranking done by parents was about 90% the same as the ranking done by the experts. So what do we conclude? Are parents at least 90% as good as the experts in making a choice and figuring out which is the right school for their children?